I will tell you this now. Just stop with me and we're done. You don't need to watch anybody else.
If only that was true. But at tonight's Lincoln Day dinner in Iowa, there were 13 Republican candidates giving speeches, and here's just a sample of what they had to say.
Are you ready to send Joe Biden back to his basement in Delaware on a permanent vacation? I can promise you this, in my White House, there will be no cocaine allowed in the White House.
If God made you a man, you play sports against men. These are simple, common sense lessons of America.
We can end the political correctness at the Pentagon, including reinstituting a ban on transgender personnel in the United States military.
There's only one candidate, and you know who that candidate is, who's going to get the job done. And I'm going quickly because we're given 10 points and we're given 10 quick minutes, so I'm going to go quickly.
While most of the candidates ignored the elephant in the room, former Congressman Will Hurd took aim directly at the Republican frontrunner. Take a look at this.
Donald Trump is not running for president to make America great again. Donald Trump is not running for president to represent the people that voted for him in 2016 and 2020. Donald Trump is running to stay out of prison. And if we elect... I know. Listen, I know the truth. The truth is hard. But if we elect Donald Trump, we are willingly giving Joe Biden 4 more years in the White House, and America can't handle that. God bless you, and God bless America.
Back with us tonight, Symone Sanders Townsend, former chief spokesperson for Vice President Harris, and of course, host of The Symone Show on Peacock and MSNBC, and former Republican Congressman David Jolly of Florida. David, I turn to you first because Will Hurd, he's your brand of Republican, one not afraid to go after Donald Trump. But if you listened, he was getting booed kind of right off that stage. What do you make of that?
Yeah, Stephanie, I served with Will Hurd. I know Will Hurd. I admire him. And I'm glad he did what he did tonight. But this is not his party, and he does not belong in this race. And so for Will Hurd and Chris Christie, you know, you have your own journey towards personal acceptance that there's not a role for you in this party. I do think it's curious, though, as Will Hurd and Chris Christie and maybe a little bit of Asa Hutchinson continue to prosecute this case against Donald Trump from within the Republican Party. I think the more effective thing would be to prosecute the others in the race for their inconsistencies around Donald Trump, because ultimately what you're able to do is show the fragility of the entire field. And if the goal of Republicans is to beat Joe Biden, you have a bunch of listless candidates in waiting trying to go up against the incumbent president. Look, Will Hurd said the truth tonight. This is the wrong room, wrong race. He really doesn't belong in this race for the Republican nomination.
Okay, but David, that's the thing I really don't get, right? All of these Republican nominees would like the nomination, and the clear frontrunner by a mile is Donald Trump. So if the majority of them are unwilling to go after him, what is the point of them running at all?
Their own vanities and ego. And I think where Will Hurd and Chris Christie could go with this is Mike Pence and Ron DeSantis and others would be the first one to say Donald Trump should be prosecuted if they thought that would help them get to the White House. The weakness of Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence and everyone else is that because the politics of the Republican Party continue to support the insurrectionist that is Donald Trump, the person who is likely to be indicted again, they're willing to go along with him. So the lack of leadership in the entire Republican field is the case that should be prosecuted. Everybody but Donald Trump is in this race due to their own vanities and ego and ambition, which exists in all industries, including politics. But when you're asking to hold the public trust, these people who lack the ability to hold the public trust need to be called to account. Will Hurd and Chris Christie could do that.
Symone, what do you think about these candidates? If they're not willing to go after Trump, why are they running at all?
Well, look, I think that everybody, you know, in campaigns, everybody has to have a strategy. And I think what we are dissecting here is this the right strategy in the lead up to the first debate stage where some of these folks are trying to get on it. And I would argue this. I kind of equate this to what we saw in the Democratic primary in 2020. It was really 2019 and the lead up to 2020. And in that race, then former Vice President Joe Biden, now President Biden, he was a popular candidate that people didn't want to necessarily go after. People liked him, but they wanted to make sure they, essentially cut him off, and they created a lane for themselves. I think that that didn't seem to work out well for those candidates because Joe Biden ended up becoming the nominee. But I would argue, as someone that worked on that campaign, there were some damaging moments. And I think that candidates, Republicans who would like to gain ground on Donald Trump in this race, need to take a look at how can they, as the former congressman said, how can they differentiate themselves here? I think what Will Hurd did is not going to get him any votes, because the people are with former President Trump right now. The base is with former President Trump. And so you have to differentiate in a way that does not attack the person of which people like, but shows them a different path.
Okay, but the thing is, they're not even going after one another, which is what David suggested. Ron DeSantis, right? He is running in the Republican primary. Tim Scott, who's also running in the Republican primary, has been criticizing DeSantis for his Florida education policy. And what does DeSantis do? Does he take a swing back at Tim Scott? No. He goes after Kamala Harris. How's that strategy work?
Well, it shows you who they're really scared of and who they're concerned about. I watched a number of those speeches tonight from the Lincoln dinner, and a lot of folks on that stage mentioned the vice president. I think, frankly, and Tim Scott did. He had some barely strong words for Ron DeSantis and his policy. I think that they could have been and should have been stronger in his comments on the trail. But everything that all of these candidates are saying and doing, they are going to have to answer for on the debate stage. You can bet that on the first debate, I do believe Bret Baier at Fox News is one of the folks who is moderating that debate. They're going to come with questions, and the questions are going to be sourced from all of the things that they've said, things that are happening in their states, news of the day, and Ron DeSantis' policy on essentially doing what he says he doesn't want to happen to our children, indoctrinating them with lies about our nation's history, is definitely going to be on the table.
They're also out there, these candidates, shaking hands and kissing babies. Ron DeSantis, he's currently on a bus tour of Iowa. And I want to share an interaction he had with a child who was at the state fair. Watch this.
Yeah, it's good to meet you, too. Oh, what is that? An icy? Yeah, that's probably a lot of sugar, huh? Good to see you. All right. 4-H, Wayne County.
That icy has got a lot of sugar. I get it. Meeting strangers all day is not easy. But, David, isn't that what you sign up for when you're running for president?
Stephanie, Ron DeSantis is uniquely bad at retail politics. He's uniquely unlikable. And all of this talk around the reset, Ron DeSantis doesn't need a reset. He needs a rebrand. Problem with the Ron DeSantis campaign tonight is Ron DeSantis. He is not liked, and his message is falling flat. He is angry. He is paranoid. He presents America in these dark shades. Even Donald Trump, Mr. American Carnage, wants to make America great again. Ron DeSantis is out there every day saying, America's coming for your children, and you're not a strong enough parent, so my wife Casey and I are going to protect your kids from the world. It's this creepy ethos that he has out there, and there's a ceiling to it. So Ron DeSantis might be done. Like, it's probably too late for Ron DeSantis because he needs a full rebrand, and his problem is he has spent 5 years so cementing the xenophobia and the misogyny and the racism and the anti-trans and anti-LGBT parts of his agenda. You can't come back from that. Once that image sticks to a politician, it's stuck, and he's not going to be able to rebrand. So just a reset that makes him more effective at delivering a message that hasn't worked thus far could actually hurt his campaign further, and I suspect that's what we'll see happen.
Simone, what is your reaction? Who is Ron DeSantis looking to connect with? If he wants to go after corporate America, which he does, now it's, well, I'm going to connect with the families out there. That moment he had with that little kid was, at best, super cringy.
Look, the bus tour is a great idea. It's just the wrong candidate. Look, Ron DeSantis, I got two words for y'all. Scott Walker. I've been saying for a very long time that Governor DeSantis is the Scott Walker of 2024. And I would like to plant my flag on that hill right now. Scott Walker was a governor who ran for president, who, had taken on the unions in his state, who was supposed to be the next great hope for the Republican Party. And at this point, multiple people are Googling what exactly happened to him. Ron DeSantis, again, I think is someone that, and I'm just going to say it, a lot of donors hyped him up. I think that the media apparatus across the board hyped him up when there was no there. There are a lot of other, I think, good candidates in this race that Republican voters could and I think are looking at. But the question is, can any of them break through and gain ground on Donald Trump? And I think it just remains to be seen if so.
Or maybe they just need to prep Ron DeSantis. He's at the Iowa State Fair. They don't serve quinoa.
Steph,
and
there's
kale.
some things you can't teach, okay? You can't teach. There's just some things you cannot teach. And Ron DeSantis has made it very clear he does not enjoy being out there in the heat with the people, honey, with the children, with the hot dogs. He doesn't like it. Okay, now Casey DeSantis, put that lady on the campaign trail.